I had Ujwala Tulshigiri on the show last week. She's an engineering manager at Uber in charge of the real-time analytics platform. We were talking about technology consolidation, migrating workloads, and there was really so much in the conversation that we split it over two parts. So today is the rest of that conversation with Ujwala. Let's listen in. You being an infrastructure team, kind of a service organization internally, do your internal customers have the option of saying no to you? I mean, if you're saying we're migrating this, do you get to say we're migrating this, or is that a mutual decision?
Generally, it is like the org level strategy, right? Like, so for example, when we like declare some migration, it has to be followed, backed up by some reasoning, like why we are doing it, right? And it's not
Okay.
only like, for example, in case of Elasticsearch, like there might not be a single system that can replace ES, right? Elasticsearch, because, for example, Pinot is good for analytics, but then it might not provide you the full text search capabilities, like
Yeah,
ranking
right. I
and
mean,
other.
there's text indexing, but it's that's not the same thing.
Exactly.
It's don't do that. Right.
Right, right.
I
And
mean,
like,
it'll never give you ranked answers. It's which is kind of like basic search stuff. It
right.
is, yeah.
So, like ranking and relevance is something not possible with the Pinot, right? So for that, like they had to migrate to other in-house solution. So like they had created like this high-level guideline on which to, in what cases,
Okay.
like
So
which
even
technology.
even the search workloads got migrated off of Elastic.
Yeah. Like so that like
Oh.
because when we decide to phase out the technology, like it has to have a path for all the available use cases, right?
Well, yeah, everybody,
Yeah.
you still need to
Right.
take care of your
Exactly.
customers. Oh, okay, I just thought the analytics stuff got migrated off, but it was all a
Yeah.
total. Okay.
But I think like this kind of like also paved way to the many feature contributions to the open source. For example, partial upsearch or the hyperlog log plus. Those are the features we contributed. So again, like going back to my previous argument about if your architecture is extensible, we can build these features. It's just a matter of like engineering team spending some time and making it a production ready and like releasing them, right? And we also like get a very good support from the open source community for the design reviews or like maybe the code reviews, like too, so that we can roll it out faster. Actually, one of the main change that we recently did, also not recently, like maybe 3-4 years back, was we don't really develop features in house. So for the Pinot, for example, we develop directly on the open source, and then like we cherry pick internally as we need, or like we do through the version upgrades.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the main advantage with that, right? Like so you solve the divergence that happens, right? Like because maintaining internally and then open sourcing, that has like some disadvantages, right? Because you sometimes engineers do not have a time, or that is not a priority, or then they think that, oh, maybe I don't want to do it now, let's do it like later on. But by the time you decide to contribute it, like there are like so many merge conflicts which are so
Right.
hard to resolve, and then we just decide, oh, maybe it is not worth investing into, right? And that makes our job much harder, because if we want to get the latest Pinot versions in the open source, we might have to go through the another exercise of like making sure these two branches are in alignment with each other.
Yeah, because after a while, I mean, if merge conflicts are what you're facing, like that's kind of the best. Well, the best case is no merge conflicts. But if it's just merge conflicts, okay, fine, you can work those out. But
Yeah.
after a certain amount, it's going to be merge conflicts plus sort of deeper semantic conflicts. Things have changed, ideas have changed, fundamental data structures, paths, interfaces, and it's still probably cheaper than just re-implementing it, but it begins to approach the cost of doing the implementation on upstream. So I get it. It's never going to feel like a priority.
Right.
Things are going to get distant. And there you go. And so just as a policy, look, we work on Pinot and you build from main, you're not waiting for major releases. You're running your own build, I assume.
Yeah.
So you get those features as soon as they're merged. That's smart.
Right. Yeah. And then actually like we also try to do more frequent upgrades. Like, so of course we are not there at like where it is like every 2 weeks or something, but we still do pretty frequent upgrades now compared to before. So that is helping. Also, it gives a motivation to engineers to contribute to the open source, or like maybe just build those relationships with the community members. Also, present their features in the meetups. So it has its own advantages as well.
Yeah, really. Okay. No, I thought I was going to learn about how Uber does technology consolidation, but you're really kind of firming up some basic open source and technology selection principles here too. This is great.
Right.
All right. So we've got AriesDB, we've got Elastic. What else?
Next, actually, and which is, I think I will say it is more recent. Actually, this is something that we did just last year. So there was a like one internal marketing use case at Uber, like around the cohorting, and they were using the MemSQL. So MemSQL is again another OLAP engine, like, but it has more advanced feature for joins and whatnot. It was also license based. For example, there is a the company was paying X number of X dollar amount, like to use the MemSQL at Uber, right? And then it has like some challenges. Like, for example, it's not like they didn't try to explore other alternatives at Uber, but they could not find a single database that will satisfy all their requirements. And that was, I think, the biggest blocker was like running the distributed joins with very low latency and with also a support of real-time updates data in the data, right? Like, so it was kind of complicating the use case.
Sure. So upserts and joins again.
Upsets and join. And here we are talking about more complex joins on the billions of rows. And then like the low latencies, because generally the join queries are expensive. So it is.
I was going to say, what's low here?
Latency.
Latency. But what is your definition of low for this use case?
Exactly. So yeah, that is an interesting question actually, because generally when we think about the Pinot, we are always talking about like some milliseconds of latencies, like
50, I got down to 17 milliseconds, and yeah,
exactly,
but not joins.
But not join, because distributed joins by nature, they are going to be the expensive operations, right? Like on the database. And then here we are looking for more in the minutes, like 1 or 2 minutes. Latency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a long time. Yeah.
Right. But the feature actually was been for example, at that time the Pinot didn't support the co-located joins, and then open source community was coming up with the join framework that was extensible later on. But the thing is, like, at least they evaluated like the Pinot, and then this seems like a right choice. But it comes up with a caveat, right? Like, okay, once we deliver these features, then only like they might onboard to the Pinot realistically, because we have to think about the scale, we have to think about their query shapes, and it is like also very ad hoc in the sense that like they were letting the users to select certain filters from the UI, and based on those user actions, like queries were dynamically generated. So you don't know them in advance that, okay, what kind of queries you will be expecting, or what kind of the ranges that you will be expecting, right? Like, it's just very variable pattern. Mm-hmm. And then over the next like few quarters, actually, we ended up spending a lot of efforts, like investments, working with like the StarTree engineers as well to develop this feature. And we got the first stable version, and it was a pretty interesting journey.
This is still joins here.
It is a join, but it is different than just the dim fact table join, right? Like, which is possible with the lookup UDF.
Right. But so the multi-stage.
Yeah, multi-stage, exactly.
So I will link to some episodes on that. I'll just make a note.
Yeah, definitely. Because without the multi-stage execution engine, we wouldn't have been able to achieve that, right? Because you need you're like kind of like joining the 2 fact tables, each one with billions of records, and then you are joining on that data. Like, it was complex actually. And then the multi-stage execution engine, and then like stabilizing it for the Uber scale, then adding the co-located join specific features on top of it. Like, so it kind of it was a long project, but like we are glad that we are able to cater to this use case. And other than just like the migration, we also achieved like few things, right? Like, for example, in this case, they needed the Spark connector. Like, Pinot has this Pinot to Hive Spark connector. Like, so you can disperse the data from the Pinot into the other other things like Hive, and which was lacking the Spark 3 support. So we added that. Again, like, so for uh, in this case, you have to understand it when you're using any third party software. It comes up with the risk. For example, you do not have a control on your data, like, because they will have access to your data. So security is at most important. And by bringing this use case to the Pinot, we are kind of like containerizing the data within the Uber. So like it's added security advantage, right? And then you will have the expertise right when you need it. There have been cases where it was very hard to get the support, right? Because you had to go through the certain channels to even request a support and then explain the situation, what is happening. And then when both the parties are not from the same company, it is very hard to deal with that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but you're reducing, from 5 to 1 the number of platforms you need to support. And that, of course, that's going to be cheaper. That makes sense. You have, and you run it all, quote unquote, in house.
And we save the licensing fee.
Your own management. Yeah.
And we also save the licensing fee, which was also in the millions. Like, so basically, that's a added visible cost efficiency gain.
Very visible. That makes the business case much. That's numbers that are going to be visible at Uber. You get into millions, and everybody's going to see that.
Right.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got AriesDB, Elasticsearch, MemSQL, and I mean, it should be clear that all of these things are technologies that have valid use cases. They are perfectly good technologies. Like, you migrated off Elastic because of the license. I mean, I personally am not totally critical of all those business or community license things, but you had reasons, and there are still good reasons to use Elastic, good reasons to use MemSQL. These are valid things. They were not, and I've been trying to, you've been sharing these reasons why they just weren't working at Uber and they didn't make sense at Uber. So you migrated workloads off of them.
Okay.
What is next in the list? What's the other technology?
Yeah, I think our next story is like slightly different than the ones that I talked about, right? Like, so the last one is the ClickHouse, which is very interesting story. So the ClickHouse is again like the open source OLAP engine. Like, it caters to the many real time analytics use cases for the user facing analytics, and it is
kind of like Pinot.
Yeah, and it is extremely also efficient at like processing the petabytes of storage, right? But I think like the main motivation in our case to consolidate the ClickHouse on the Pinot is mainly because of the way it was adopted within the Uber. And going back to the open source adoption principles that I talked about, we did not had any expertise on the ClickHouse internally. There was no team who knows internal technology architecture, or even the things that we needed to navigate through the incident, right? Like, so, or the outages, and then basically like in that case, actually, as I talked about, like, so you have the pretty old version of the ClickHouse, or like maybe it's very hard to like upgrade it because you don't know what other issues that you will encounter. And then the what is the lock-in risk, right? Like, so for example, if you are going with the ClickHouse, then you still have to put the team around it. You have to invest into them. It also lacked the control plane at that time. So basically, each customer ended up building their own control plane on ClickHouse, which had a very tight integration with the physical nodes of the ClickHouse. So that kind of made it very complex to manage. Like, so for example, when we consider as a platform, right? Like, so customer do not need to know what happens behind the scene. Nodes getting added or like removed, or maybe
ideally this is a service.
Exactly.
They're not in that business.
Right. But because of this very tight integration, they were heavily involved in the cluster management or the maintenance operations as well. So I think like all these things like over the period like helped us to move into a direction of the consolidation. But it was not easy to migrate those use cases. For example, like logging or matching, like they use heavy real-time log search capabilities. And over the period, like over the last 1 year, actually we improved the JSON index and text index capabilities in the Pinot, made it more efficient, like especially the leucine based text indexes, right? Making it work at the scale that we see. And we are talking about like the tens of petabytes of storage, right? Like, so it is extremely complex. And at that point of time, it's not only about the feature, but it's also about like how you define your topology, or like how many clusters or how many different tenants that are needed to serve this efficiently. Like, so you have to achieve the isolation, but you also had to control the resource usage. Like, so those things that we had to evaluate a lot. But we are glad with the progress so far. So this is still the ongoing effort. But
Okay.
yeah, so there is a lot more work to do. But I think we will definitely share our experience and learnings once the work is finished.
I hope there is an engineering blog post.
Yeah.
A few other thoughts there, though, because it just in terms of nothing to do with ClickHouse, but just technology adoption in general.
Yeah.
It's a big company. There's lots of engineers, lots of individual groups, business units, all kinds of, we call it organizational differentiation, right? It's not just one big blob. It's a bunch of pieces, and it has to be a bunch of pieces because people have to be able to think about it. And like every manager, I mean, you manage engineers. There's only so much you can think about. You can't do real-time analytics and all streaming and UI, and like that's just too much, right? So everybody's got to have a limited scope. So that means this piece over here can sometimes say, well, we're just going to adopt this technology. We would like this thing. We're going to start using it. And maybe that works for them. Maybe there's a champion. Maybe there's somebody who's making that adoption decision who does know the internals well and is able to use and operate it effectively at the time the decision gets made. But if it doesn't get critical mass, and say that person leaves or moves on to something else internally, whatever, now you've got this technology sitting there that, like you said at the beginning, nobody knows a lot about. You've got lots of institutional Pinot knowledge and not a lot of institutional ClickHouse knowledge. So it's kind of this orphaned piece of tech. And that can happen with anything.
Yeah. Actually, that is like applicable to any technology, right? Like, so that's why I think that was a good exercise for us, like to come up with the right technology adoption list, right? Like for the overall company, basically. I'm not just talking about like maybe one team as such, but like, and we have to consider the different factors there. Like, as I mentioned, like what is the adoption cost? Or, for example, do you have the in-house integration done in a right way? Do you have the in-house maintenance or operations plan? Because every service will have like its on call or like its like operations, like restarts, like node replacements, whatnot, right? So you have to like make sure that like integrations work seamlessly with the rest of the ecosystem. Like even now, actually, like for Pinot, because you have this core technology, but you have to also build the ecosystem, right? Like, for example, we have came up with this metadata service, which integrates it with the self-serve onboarding UI, like where user doesn't need to know about like how my Pinot tables are going to work, but they just like set up the ingestion sources and like whether it's a Kafka or other.
Get data from here. Here's the metadata.
Yeah.
Give me my thing.
Right. And even after the data set is like set up, like then you need the data discovery, right? Like the schema discovery. So we have integrated with the data book. There is also the internal query builder tool actually, so which allows you to start querying your table after it is created within few minutes actually. Oh, wow. So and you do not have to set up anything because as I'm not sure if you know this, but Uber is heavily like run by operations, right? Like, so there are like a lot of ops people who wants to get things up and running like in a very short amount of time, but we don't expect them to have a deep understanding of like how the databases work or like how the schemas work, right? So for them, actually, we have simplified this simple click-based UI, right? Like, so they can just follow through this. Like, so and they are like pretty happy with this overall ecosystem. Yeah.
Yes. Jean-Marc Degani, call your office. That's sounds like something she'd say, that the folks operating the infrastructure aren't the folks who know the shape of the data.
Yes.
That's the application developers. We know that now. 20 years ago, their mistakes were made. So I'm glad that you're doing that.
Right. And beyond the actually, like, let's say basic technology, the people also wants to know about what are the new visualization tools that I can set up on this. So we have this Grafana integration. We have also the alerting setup where people can just write the Pinot queries to generate the alerts. So that kind of very easy to use infrastructure integrations. And I think that also is one of the contributor factors which led to the increase in Pinot adoption at Uber over the years.
Yeah. And those investments in internal tooling and the layers you're describing that sound wonderful, right? Sounds like kind of nice to be a developer using your platform. So good job. Those investments are worth it the more consolidation there is, right? If you have to do it 5 times, you have 5 different tools, you're not going to be able to do all that. And it's going to be, everybody's going to be a little worse off because they're not going to have, the advantage of those convenient layers.
Yeah. I mean, you can focus your efforts, right? Like, so you can invest into the teams, like, just to not only just like build or like maybe those expertise, but also like encourage the employees to like, or engineers to like focus on the right problems, not just, okay, this is the new technology, now we are going to adopt, and then like do the checklist for them, right? Or whether the service has on call, whether the service has the like right deployment model, whether the service has like all the necessary pieces for easy integrations, and we repeat the same experience for experiment with each technology. So if you take away the rest of that noise, then you can focus on just one, and make it better. Yeah.
One more question on this last one. Now, to acknowledge biases, obviously I have a bias in favor of Pinot. You're a very important Pinot community member, but you're also an engineer. So, I trust you to be objective about this. What are there things that you saw? Everything we've been talking about is just, well, Uber is all in on Pinot, and so ClickHouse was kind of over here, and we just didn't want to support it. Were there things that ClickHouse was good at that were feature gaps in Pinot, or things that worked better in Pinot than in ClickHouse? Like, I know that's kind of a spicy question, but I'm interested in your experience since you've operated and managed both. What's it like?
Yeah, I think the ClickHouse actually, the one of the differences, right? Basically, you can throw a query at it, and then it will just do a brute force and give you the answer. Like, so, right? But sometimes that is not all you want. Basically, you wanted to take advantage of the underlying storage capabilities, like in building those indexes and maybe running the applications queries at like really fast speed. So I will say we have been, at least like at Uber, like we never had any high QPS use cases at ClickHouse. So majority of them were like less than 100 maybe, right? Like, so that was the scale we have. We never like utilized the ClickHouse capabilities at the larger scale. And also like, and then like another factor I will say, which was good at maybe, is the SQL feature functions, right? Like, so like ClickHouse is like has a really rich feature set like to operate on, like maybe complex array functions, or maybe just in general like or the unnest function, like those kinds of like have been like well supported, for which like we had to find some workaround in the Pinot, or like maybe just build them or support them like natively, right? It's not like hard. It's just that like Pinot is still evolving community, right? Like, so and it's also the use cases that we support on the Pinot are completely different in nature. Like, for example, not two use cases are similar. So on one side, like, yes, we are looking at like some very high throughput, 1 million Kafka messages per second, that it is heavy ingestion, right? Or on the other side, we are also looking at like some high QPS, like thousands, like 10,000, 20,000 QPS for the analytics queries. And then we also are trying to keep up with the data freshness requirement. Like, for the real time, we have the like less than a second, less than a minute, like data freshness requirement use cases, right? So it differs. Like, some of them are like they don't care about like data freshness, but they want the very low query latencies. So either they can go ahead with the offline ingestion or they can go with the real-time ingestion, but like we enable lot of indexes. For example, I will say like inverted index, range index, like text search index or JSON index, Bloom filter index. Like these are like some of the new upcoming things actually which are in the open source, and we are not only just able to validate them, but also support this really big use cases using those features. So I will say like Pinot has done a good job in the providing that model, like where one platform can sufficiently serve many analytical use cases or like maybe all of the analytical use cases, but ClickHouse is maybe good at like certain things, like so that's at least like our
your experience.
Experience has been.
Yeah. So if your use cases were limited to those things that it's good at, it could have been the one that you standardized on, but since you had all these other things you had to do, it
and another thing actually which I forgot, but I think which is one of the significant contributor to these discussions as well is the having a separate control plane, right, or this like management layer that to take away the complexities from what customer need to know about. For example, for us, Pinot, we just say that you interact with us in terms of tables. You don't deal with the instances. You don't deal with the physical nodes. You just create tables. You manage your tables, like do the schema evaluation or even delete the table. Beyond that, you do not need to know. You just give us the certain SLAs that you have on your query, and we'll try to match it with the available features or like optimization that Pinot provides. If you have certain ingestion requirements, that also we can give you. If your growth increases in the feature, we will horizontally scale your clusters to, and not only just the Pinot servers, but like the broker and controllers, like we can scale accordingly, right? Like, so it has been a very seamless operations for them. Compared to the ClickHouse, at least like it is mainly because of the way it was deployed at Uber, but that was also one of the pain points with the ClickHouse, which
ingestion and the lack of the separate control plane made it hard to expose just kind of serverless analytics. Here are our tables. Don't worry about the details.
But I think like I will say like every technology has like some pros and some cons, right? Like it's always depends upon like what you want to do with it actually.
My guest today has been Ujwala Tulshigiri. Ujwala, thank you for being a part of the Real Time Analytics podcast.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Tim.
And there you have it. If you feel compelled to help us spread the word and grow the Real Time Analytics community, you can give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are sold. If you're watching us on YouTube, hey, subscribe and, of course, hit that notification bell. And you can always share your favorite episodes on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever it is you do social media. Thanks, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode.